If you fix that engine, I'll marry you. The words, sharp and brittle as shattered glass, were not a joke. They were a weapon, a cruel and very public taunt, hurled across the tense silence of the company warehouse like a gunshot. Rebecca Williams, the chief engineer at Precision Automotive, a woman whose ambition was as sharp and as polished as her designer stilettos, held her high-end smartphone aloft, its camera lens pointed directly at David Jackson. A venomous, triumphant smile played on her lips, a smile that didn't come anywhere near her cold, calculating eyes. "I'm recording everything, David," she announced, her voice a silken, dangerous purr that was meant to be heard by every single one of the employees who had gathered to watch the spectacle. "When you fail, and you will fail, miserably, I want everyone to see what happens when someone tries to take a place that isn't theirs." David Jackson, 38 years old, stood motionless in the center of the vast, and now very quiet, warehouse. He had spent more of his life under the hoods of cars, his hands deep in the greasy, intricate guts of an engine, than Rebecca Williams had spent studying in the hallowed, and very expensive, halls of her Ivy League university. His hands, which were calloused and scarred, the nails permanently rimmed with a faint dark line of grease, told stories of engines saved from the brink of death, of complex mechanical puzzles solved when all the other, more credentialed technicians had given up and walked away. His small and very cluttered workshop on the south side of Detroit, a part of the city that people like Rebecca Williams usually only saw from the tinted windows of their luxury cars, didn't have any state-of-the-art computerized equipment. It didn't have any fancy gold-embossed certifications hanging on the wall. But it had something that the entire multi-million-dollar precision engineering department at this company could never, ever, hope to buy. It had a pure and very rare mechanical genius, the experimental engine that now sat on the heavy metal workbench in the center of the warehouse, a silent and very expensive testament to a spectacular failure, had withstood 3 long and very frustrating weeks of intense and very costly technical analysis. 5 of the company's top engineers, all of them men and women with master's degrees and Ph.D.S. from the country's most prestigious universities, had, just the day before, declared the project officially and very publicly dead, a catastrophic and very embarrassing failure that had cost the company over $200,000 in research and development. It was not just any engine, it was a revolutionary and potentially game-changing prototype for a new generation of electric cars. It was a piece of proprietary technology that, if successful, promised to increase the range of their vehicles by a staggering 60%, a breakthrough that would leave their competitors in the dust. "You have until Friday," Rebecca announced, her voice now a loud and very public declaration, her gaze sweeping over the small, and now very captivated, crowd of employees who had gathered to watch the public humiliation. 5 days, David. 5 days to do what our entire team of experts couldn't do in 3 long weeks. And when you fail," she added, her voice now dropping to a low and very menacing whisper, "I want every single person in this company to understand why some people without the proper education, without the proper background, need to learn to accept their natural limitations." The comment, the challenge, the public and very cruel trap had come up during a tense and very unproductive meeting about the constant and very costly delays on the new production line. Someone, a junior and now very terrified engineer, had casually and very foolishly mentioned that even that guy, David, from the little repair shop down the street, the one all the old-timers rave about, could probably fix this thing faster than our entire department. Rebecca had exploded. Her usual and very carefully maintained mask of cool, professional competence had cracked, revealing the raw and very ugly face of her own and very deep-seated insecurities. Her cheeks had flushed a dark and very unbecoming shade of red. "Bring him in." Then she had taunted, her voice a cutting and very sarcastic sneer. "Bring in this miracle mechanic. And if he can fix what 5 of the most highly trained and very expensive specialists in this entire industry couldn't, then I will personally hand him a $200,000 a year engineering contract." It was a cruel and very effective trap, and everyone in that room, from the CEO down to the janitor, knew it. David Jackson didn't have a college degree. He didn't have access to the company's proprietary and very secret technical manuals, and he certainly didn't have any of the computerized and very state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment that cost more than most people's homes. "Just look at him, Jake," Rebecca's sycophantic and equally ambitious assistant muttered. To his colleagues, his own voice a low and very contemptuous whisper, he probably didn't even finish high school, and he wants to compete with real and very educated engineers. David didn't show any sign that he had heard the comment. His dark and very intelligent eyes were fixed on the complex and very silent engine before him. There was an intensity in his gaze, a profound and very deep concentration that made some of the people present, the more perceptive, more empathetic ones, shift uncomfortably. It was the silent and very focused concentration of a man who had faced impossible and very dangerous challenges before. A man who had learned, through a long and very hard and very painful experience, how to read the secret and very silent language of a machine, a language that others, with all of their books and all of their theories, didn't even know existed. Pathetic, Rebecca whispered, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, as she continued to film every single and very satisfying second of the planned and very public humiliation. He doesn't even know where to start. But while everyone else in that room in that moment laughed and mocked and silently judged him, something in David Jackson's quiet and very steady eyes suggested a dangerous and very profound serenity. A serenity that did not, in any way, match the seemingly desperate and very hopeless situation in which he now found himself. It was the calm and very centered serenity of a man who holds a piece of information, a secret, a truth, that could, and very likely would, rewrite the entire, and very arrogant, narrative of superiority that was being so gleefully, and so cruelly, constructed around him. There, in the center of that vast, and very silent, warehouse, in front of all those contemptuous, and very prejudiced, stares, in front of all those phone cameras that were pointed at him like weapons, David Jackson stood firm. He stood like a man who knows, with an absolute and an unshakable certainty, the true and very heavy weight of the words he had just heard, and the very high and very painful price that some people were about to pay for their own and very self-inflicted arrogance. The video of Rebecca's cruel and very public provocations spread through the company's internal social media networks like a wildfire. In less than 24 hours, the short and very humiliating recording had been shared in dozens of different and very private internal groups. It was accompanied by a torrent of cruel and often very racist laughter, and a series of poisonous and very cutting comments, all of them dissecting every single and very painful second of David's public humiliation. Someone should tell David that a marriage to Rebecca probably doesn't include any medical benefits, wrote a man named Mike from the sales department, his comment followed by a long and very enthusiastic row of crying laughing emojis. I can't wait to see the look on his face when he finds out he can't even fix a toaster, let alone a multi-million-dollar prototype engine, wrote another. David found out about the viral video when his teenage daughter Jasmine came home from school with her eyes red and very swollen from crying. Dad, she had said, her own voice a small and very broken whisper, my classmates, they're sharing a video of you. On TikTok they're saying horrible things. Sitting in the small and very modest living room of the small and very modest apartment he had shared with his daughter ever since his beloved wife Linda had died in a car accident 5 long and very lonely years ago, David had felt a familiar and very hot pang of a controlled and a very dangerous anger rise in his chest. It was the same and very helpless feeling he had had all those years ago when the doctors at the underfunded and very overcrowded public hospital had told him that there was nothing more they could do for Linda, that maybe, just maybe, things would have been different if only they had been able to afford a private and very expensive clinic. Don't you listen to those people, princess, David had murmured, as he had hugged his daughter, her small and very trembling body a fragile and very precious anchor in the stormy and very unpredictable sea of his own life. Some people, they only feel important, they only feel big, by making other people feel small. But inside, in a quiet, and very dark, and very methodical corner of his mind, something was being very carefully, and very precisely, catalogued, and filed away. Every single face that had laughed, every single, and very cruel, comment, every single person who had filmed his humiliation, for their own, and very free, and very cheap entertainment. At Precision Automotive, Rebecca Williams was savoring every single and very delicious moment of her anticipated and very public victory. During the Monday morning executive meeting, she had, with a triumphant and very theatrical flourish, projected the video of her confrontation with David onto the massive and very high-definition screen in the conference room. It had elicited a fresh and very satisfying wave of widespread and very sycophantic laughter from the other and very powerful executives. Look at the look of confidence on his face. Rebecca had sneered as she had paused the video, at the exact moment that David had silently and very calmly nodded to accept her impossible and very public challenge. It's almost touching, isn't it? How some people, they just can't seem to recognize their own and very obvious limitations. The company's CEO, a man named Thomas Crawford, a 60-year-old man who had built his massive and very successful automotive empire through decades of hard and very honest work, had watched the scene with an increasingly and very visibly uncomfortable expression on his face. Rebecca, he had said, his own voice a low and very cautionary rumble, don't you think this has gone a little too far? The man isn't even here to defend himself. That's exactly why it's so educational, Thomas. Rebecca had retorted, her own smile as sharp and as cold as a shard of glass. How many times are we, as a company, going to waste our valuable time, and our even more valuable resources, on people who are clearly, and very obviously, not qualified to be here? This is a lesson for all of us, about the importance of maintaining our own, and very appropriate, standards. Jake, her sycophantic and equally ambitious assistant, had, of course, seized the opportunity to attack. My cousin is a mechanical engineer, he had announced, his own voice full of a smug and very second-hand authority. He has a degree from MIT, and he says that this type of prototype engine is practically, and very literally, impossible to repair, without the use of a very specialized, and very expensive, piece of diagnostic equipment. David here, he probably can't even read the technical diagrams. What none of them, in their gilded, and very insulated, and very arrogant world, knew was that David Jackson had, in fact, spent the last 3 days, and most of the last 3 nights, completely and utterly immersed in something that went far, far beyond any simple and very two-dimensional technical diagrams. Not in his small and very cluttered and very familiar workshop, surrounded by a small and very precarious mountain of technical manuals he had borrowed from the public library, and a series of patent printouts he had downloaded for free from the internet. He was in the process of discovering something that would, in a few short and very satisfying days, make all of that arrogant and very cruel laughter stick in their very dry and very surprised throats. The engine wasn't just broken, it had been deliberately and very brilliantly sabotaged. It was a subtle and very sophisticated act of sabotage, almost imperceptible to anyone who did not possess decades of a deep and a very hands-on practical experience. But David, who had learned over the course of a long and very hard and very honest life how to read the secret and very silent language of a machine, had learned to read the signs that the office-bound and very theoretical engineers would never ever be able to notice. 3 small and very crucial components had been intentionally and very precisely damaged in a way that would perfectly and very convincingly simulate a natural and very catastrophic system failure. But the pattern of the damage, the specific and very unusual nature of the fractures, was too precise, too specific, too intelligent to be a coincidence. Someone, somewhere, inside the hallowed and very secure walls of Precision Automotive, had deliberately and very skillfully sabotaged the company's own and very expensive prototype. Interesting, David had muttered to himself as he had meticulously and very carefully photographed each and every piece of the damning evidence with his old and very battered cell phone. Very, very interesting. On Tuesday, Rebecca, who was now fully and very comfortably immersed in her own and very intoxicating sense of a righteous and a very public superiority, had decided to step up her campaign of humiliation. She had created a new and very popular WhatsApp group, which she had, with a characteristic and very cruel lack of subtlety, named Miracle Mechanic Updates, and she had added every single and very willing employee of the company to it, where she had begun to post a series of sarcastic and very witty updates on David's supposed and very hilarious lack of progress. Day 2, she had written, Her message followed by a long and very enthusiastic string of laughing and very approving reactions from her colleagues. Our hero is probably still trying to figure out where the start button is. I bet he's already given up and is down at the local bar. A man named Carlos from the accounting department had added, or maybe a woman named Sandra from the human resources department had commented. He has finally realized that this is not the right place for people like him. But while the entire and very professional company was having a good and very satisfying laugh at his expense, David was having a very different and a very interesting conversation. He was talking to Samuel Torres, a 70-year-old, very retired, veteran mechanic, a man who had worked at Precision Automotive for 40 longer and very hard years before he had finally, and very gratefully, retired. That kind of sabotage, Samuel had said, his own, and very experienced, eyes examining the high-resolution photographs that David had taken of the damaged engine parts. That's the signature of someone on the inside. He had nodded, a slow and very sad, and very wise nod. I know that pattern. I have seen it before, about 15 years ago, when someone very high up, was trying to derail a series of specific and very promising projects in order to favor a series of other and very lucrative outside contracts. David had nodded slowly. You know people, he had asked, his own voice a low and very quiet and very strategic whisper, who still work there. Samuel had smiled, a slow and very wide and very mischievous smile, his own and very old and very wise eyes sparkling with a friendly and a very dangerous mischief. Son, he had said, I know people in places you wouldn't even believe. And some of those people, he had added, his own voice now a low and very confidential whisper, are very, very interested to know why their own and very promising prototypes are being so deliberately and so skillfully sabotaged. On Wednesday, Rebecca was so confident, so absolutely and very blindly certain of her impending and very public victory that she had done something that would, in the end, prove to be the biggest and most catastrophic mistake of her entire and very brilliant professional career. She had called a local and very popular radio show, and she had told the entire and very juicy story live on the air. She had described David as some poor and very deluded neighborhood mechanic who had, in his own and very ignorant arrogance, thought that he could compete with real and very professional and very educated engineers. It's a matter of a proper and a very expensive education, she had explained, her own voice a smooth and very confident and very condescending purr to the thousands and thousands of listeners. Some people, you know, they just need to learn to accept their own and very natural limitations. What Rebecca, in her own and very blind arrogance, didn't know was that one of the program's most attentive and most regular listeners was a woman named Dr. Angela Morrison. Dr. Morrison was a full and very tenured professor of mechanical engineering at the University of Detroit, and she was also a nationally renowned and very respected consultant who specialized in the very specific and very arcane field of industrial sabotage. Angela had worked on similar and very high-profile cases before, and something in Rebecca's smug and very detailed description of the unrepairable engine had set off a series of loud and very professional alarm bells in her very experienced and very brilliant mind. That same afternoon, Dr. Angela Morrison had shown up, unannounced, at David's small and very cluttered workshop with a very unexpected and a very intriguing proposal. Mr. Jackson, she had said, her own voice a calm and a very professional and a very no-nonsense sound, my name is Angela Morrison. I heard about your situation on the radio this morning, and I would really, really like to take a look at that impossible engine. David had watched her carefully. Angela was a black woman, in her late 50s, with a confident and very powerful posture, the posture of a person who had fought and had won 1,000 and very difficult battles to earn the respect she so clearly and so deservedly commanded in a series of predominantly male and predominantly white professional environments. A university professor, David had asked, his own voice a low and very cautious murmur. Among other things, Angela had smiled, a small and a very knowing and a very dangerous smile. But today, Mr. Jackson, I am here as someone who recognizes a very professional and a very sophisticated act of sabotage when she sees one. David had slowly and very deliberately opened the door to his workshop, finally, and for the very first time, allowing someone else, someone from the outside, to see what he, in his own, and very quiet, and very brilliant, way, had discovered, while Rebecca Williams had been continuing her relentless, and very public, campaign of humiliation on social media, posting a series of cruel and very viral memes and racking up thousands of likes, and very supportive comments from her equally prejudiced, and very ignorant colleagues. Something very different, and something very powerful, was beginning to crystallize in the quiet and very concentrated silence of David Jackson's small and very humble workshop. Every single and very recorded laugh, every single and very poisonous comment, every single and very public moment of a calculated and a very cruel contempt was being carefully and very methodically archived, not just in his own and very sharp and very unforgiving memory, but now in a growing and a very damning file of a concrete and a very irrefutable evidence that would very soon show everyone, and especially Rebecca Williams, exactly who was really and truly out of their place in this story. Dr. Angela Morrison wasn't just a university professor for 20 long and very distinguished years. She had served as a senior and very discreet technical expert for the FBI on a series of complex and very high-stakes cases of industrial and corporate sabotage, and what she saw in the quiet and very cluttered space of David Jackson's small and very humble workshop confirmed her darkest and most professional suspicions. This isn't just a simple act of sabotage, Angela had murmured, her own and very experienced eyes examining the detailed and very high-resolution photographs that David had so carefully and so meticulously taken of the damaged engine parts. This is a specific and a very sophisticated pattern, a pattern I have seen before. Someone, somewhere, inside Precision Automotive, is selling the company's prototypes, its intellectual property, to its competitors, and then they are sabotaging the originals to cover up the theft. Samuel Torres, the retired and very wise veteran mechanic who had joined their small and now very powerful team, had nodded, his own and very weathered face grim. I have suspected something like this for the last few years I was with the company, he had said, his own voice a low and a very sad and a very angry rumble. Projects that failed, too strangely, too conveniently, to be a simple coincidence. Meanwhile, Rebecca, who was now completely and utterly consumed by her own and very intoxicating and very dangerous confidence, had intensified her campaign of public humiliation. She had created a public and very popular Facebook event, which she had, with her characteristic and very cruel flair, named Wedding of the Century, the engineer and the mechanic, and she had invited every single and very willing employee of the company to attend, to witness the historic moment. I've even picked out my dress, she had posted on her Instagram stories, as she had filmed herself, laughing hysterically. Something very simple, of course, because it's going to be a very, very quick ceremony. Like 5 seconds of, I told you this wouldn't work, and that's it. The comments on all of her social media platforms were as cruel as they were abundant. Poor guy, he has no idea what's coming. Someone should warn him that he can still back out now and keep some small tattered shred of his dignity. David had watched it all, silently, his own face a mask of a calm and very controlled and very dangerous composure. He had captured a screenshot of every single and very damning post, of every single and very cruel comment, of every single and very documented moment of a public and a very vicious cruelty. His daughter, Jasmine, who had, with her own and very quiet and very brilliant intelligence, learned how to use a very sophisticated and very professional video editing software at her high school, was now helping him. She was methodically and very skillfully organizing all of the digital evidence into a single and very powerful and very damning timeline. Dad, look at this, Jasmine had said, her own voice a mixture of a deep and a very painful anger and a new and a very fierce pride, as she had shown him her phone. She's made a new video, imitating you. At work, it already has over 15,000 views. In the video, Rebecca had staged a cruel and a very racist parody. She had put on a pair of greasy and very ill-fitting overalls, and she had darkened her face with some kind of makeup, and she was pretending to be a confused and very incompetent mechanic, trying, and very hilariously, failing, to understand a complex and very sophisticated engine. She was using an exaggerated and very stereotypical voice, and a series of exaggerated and very offensive gestures that were clearly and very deliberately intended to satirize and to demean a series of very ugly and very racist racial stereotypes. Perfect, David had muttered, as he had saved the video to their growing and very damning file of evidence. Keep documenting everything, Princess. Every single and very ugly thing. On Thursday, Angela had returned to the workshop, her own face now a mask of a new and a very grim and a very determined resolve. David, she had said, her own voice a low and a very serious and a very dangerous whisper, I need to show you something. I managed to get access, through a very old and a very reliable contact in the company's insurance department, to Precision's internal maintenance records. For the last 5 years, the documents, which she had spread out on the surface of David's cluttered workbench, had revealed a systematic and a very chilling pattern. 8 different and very promising prototypes had failed, in a very similar and a very suspicious way, over the past 3 years. Always following the same and very specific method of sabotage that David had so brilliantly and so intuitively identified in their own and very current engine. But more importantly, all of the failures, every single one of them, had occurred on projects that had been led by either black engineers or by women. This isn't just about the theft of technology, David. Angela had explained, her own voice now a low and a very angry and a very righteous rumble. This is about keeping certain people, certain very talented and very qualified people, out of the positions of power and of leadership in this company. She had paused, and her own gaze, which was now as hard and as cold as steel, had met his. When these projects fail, she had added, her own voice now a quiet and a very deadly whisper. These engineers, these brilliant and very promising young engineers, they get demoted or they get fired. Samuel had connected the dots, and guess who, he had said, his own voice now a low and a very dangerous and a very angry growl, always takes over the projects after the failures. He had paused, and his own and very old and very wise eyes had met David's. The very same group of white and very male and very mediocre engineers who are now, at this very moment, laughing at you. David had spent that entire and very long and very sleepless night working on the engine with a new and a very fierce and a very righteous sense of purpose. He wasn't just fixing it now. He was meticulously and very carefully and very brilliantly documenting every single and very damning piece of the evidence of the sabotage. He was creating a detailed and a very technical and a very irrefutable report. A report that would be impossible for anyone, not the company, not the engineers, not the world, to refute. Dad, Jasmine had said, her own voice a quiet and a very worried whisper as she had entered the workshop in the deep and very dark hours of the morning, carrying a steaming and very welcome cup of coffee. Are you sure you want to do this? These people, they are very, very powerful. David had stopped working and he had looked at his daughter, his beautiful and very brilliant and very strong daughter. You know what your mother always used to say, Princess? He had asked, his own voice now a low and a very gentle and a very loving murmur. She used to say that the real difference between justice and revenge is that justice protects other people from ever having to go through what you went through. On Friday morning, Rebecca Williams had arrived at the company wearing a bright and very triumphant red blazer and carrying a small and very professional camera. She had in fact hired a freelance and very expensive videographer to document the historic moment in a very high and a very professional quality. Guys, she had announced, her own voice aloud and a very confident and a very celebratory and a very premature proclamation to her assembled and very sycophantic colleagues. In 2 short hours, we are going to have some real and very viral content. The kind of video that teaches a very important and a very public lesson. A lesson about knowing your limits. Jake, her assistant, was ecstatic. I've already set up the WhatsApp group, he had said, his own voice full of a giddy and a very vicarious excitement to share it in real time. This will be a meme, a legendary meme, in a matter of minutes. What none of them, in their blind and very arrogant and very ignorant certainty, knew, was that David Jackson had already arrived. Angela Morrison was parked, discreetly, across the street from the company, with a set of very professional and very high-definition recording equipment, which she had borrowed from the university's media department. Samuel Torres was positioned, equally discreetly, at the main entrance to the warehouse, filming everything with his own, and very simple, and very effective, cell phone. And David was standing, calmly, and very patiently, next to the now perfectly functioning engine. He had an almost imperceptible and a very satisfied smile on his face, and he was holding a thick and a very heavy manila envelope, an envelope that contained much, much more than anyone in that entire and very corrupt and very prejudiced and now very doomed company could ever, in their wildest and most arrogant dreams, imagine, because sometimes, when the powerful and the very privileged people of the world completely and utterly and very fatally underestimate the quiet and the very brilliant and the very determined people they consider to be their inferiors, they forget one very, very important thing. They forget that true and lasting intelligence doesn't need a fancy and very expensive diploma to be able to rewrite all of the rules of the game. That exactly 2 o'clock on that fateful Friday afternoon, the vast and now very crowded warehouse at Precision Automotive was buzzing with a strange and a very palpable energy. Rebecca Williams had gotten exactly what she had wanted, a large and very captivated audience. There were over 100 employees, a handful of senior executives, and even some of the company's most important and most influential customers, all of whom she had personally and very specially invited to witness what she had promised would be a very educational moment about professional standards. The hired cameraman, a young and very ambitious man with a very expensive and very high-definition camera, was already in position, broadcasting a live and very high feed to the company's official and very popular social media channels. Rebecca, who was wearing a bright and very triumphant red blazer, was holding a small and very tacky bouquet of plastic flowers, which she had bought specifically for the charade. Everyone, she announced, her own voice now aloud, and a very confident and a very self-satisfied proclamation for the benefit of the camera in just a few short minutes. You are all going to witness a very valuable and a very public lesson. A lesson about the importance of knowing your own and very natural limitations. She paused, and a cruel and very theatrical smile played on her lips. David Jackson, she continued, her own voice now a low and a very dramatic and a very condescending whisper, promised to fix an engine that 5 of our most highly trained and very expensive engineers said was impossible to fix. Let's see how that ends. David entered the warehouse at that very moment. He was carrying his old and very battered toolbox, and he was walking with a quiet and a very deliberate calmness that contrasted dramatically with Rebecca's frenetic and very theatrical energy. Behind him, Angela Morrison entered, just as discreetly, and she began to film everything with her own and very professional and very high-definition equipment, which she had borrowed from the university. "Ah, our groom has arrived." Jake, Rebecca's assistant, shouted, his own voice a high and a very shrill and a very sycophantic squeal. His comment elicited a fresh and a very cruel wave of laughter from the assembled crowd. "Where's your suit, man? You can't marry the chief engineer in a pair of dirty and very unfashionable overalls." David positioned himself next to the engine he had spent the last 5 very long and very sleepless days and nights, not just repairing, but perfecting. With a series of precise and very practiced movements, he connected the last of the cables and he checked the oil levels. The silence in the warehouse was now tense, and it was broken only by the muffled and very nervous laughter of a few of the employees. "Before we begin," David said, his own voice now clear and firm and very powerful, echoing through the vast, now very silent warehouse, "I would like everyone to see something very interesting. Something that I discovered during the course of the repair." Rebecca frowned, a small and a very annoyed and a very confused crease forming between her perfectly sculpted eyebrows. This was not in the humiliation script that she had so carefully and so gleefully planned. David held up his old and very battered cell phone, and he connected it to a small and very powerful portable projector, which Angela had lent him. This engine, he announced, his own voice now ringing with a new and a very powerful and a very righteous authority, did not break by accident. It was deliberately and very skillfully sabotaged. The first image that was projected onto the large and very white wall of the warehouse showed a series of engine components, all of them damaged with a surgical and a very deliberate precision. "Look here," David said, as he pointed to the image. 3 of the main sensors were intentionally and very precisely broken in a way that would perfectly and very convincingly simulate a natural and a very catastrophic system failure. The pattern of the damage is too specific, too intelligent, to be a coincidence. A nervous and a very confused murmur ran through the crowd. Rebecca, her own face now a mask of a new and a very real and a very professional panic, tried to interrupt. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her own voice now a little too loud, a little too shrill. "You're just making excuses for your own and very obvious incompetence." "It's interesting that you mention incompetence." A new voice, a calm and a very professional and a very authoritative voice, interrupted. Angela Morrison was now approaching, a thick and a very official-looking folder in her hand. "My name is Dr. Angela Morrison," she announced, her own voice a low and a very powerful and a very nonsense rumble. "I am a full professor of mechanical engineering, and I am also a former and a very senior technical expert for the FBI on cases of industrial sabotage, and I have personally analyzed all of the extensive and very damning evidence that has been collected by Mr. Jackson, and I can confirm with an absolute and a very professional certainty that this engine was, in fact, sabotaged, following a very specific and a very familiar pattern, a pattern that I have identified in 8 previous and very suspicious cases at this very company." The blood drained completely from Rebecca's face. "What?" she whispered, her own voice now a raw and a very terrified and a very cornered sound. What is going on here?" David continued to project the images, his own voice now a calm and a very methodical and a very relentless and a very damning recitation of the facts. "Each and every one of the previous cases of sabotage," he said, "occurred on projects that were being led by either black engineers or by women. And when those projects inevitably failed, those very same and very talented professionals were either demoted or they were fired. And guess who?" he added, his own voice now a quiet and a very deadly and a very final whisper. "Always took over the projects after they had so mysteriously and so conveniently failed." Samuel Torres, the retired and very respected and now very righteous veteran mechanic, emerged from the crowd, and he was carrying his own and very thick and very damning set of documents. 40 years of working at this company," he said, his own voice a low and a very angry and a very powerful rumble, "has given me access to a great deal of information." "Rebecca," he said, as he looked directly at her, his own and very old and very wise eyes now full of a new and a very hard and a very cold and a very unforgiving light, "you and your small and very exclusive group of associates have received promotions and bonuses totaling over $1.2 million over the past 3 years, always, after taking over the very same projects that had so mysteriously and so conveniently failed." Rebecca was now visibly shaking, her own body a fragile and a very trembling and a very guilty leaf in the wind of their calm and very irrefutable and very righteous truth. "You can't prove anything," she stammered, her own voice now a weak and a very pathetic and a very desperate squeak. This is defamation." David smiled. "For the very first time in 5 very long and very difficult days." "Oh, but I can," he said. "Jake," he said, as he turned to face the now terrified and very pale assistant, "do you remember that video you made? The one where you were imitating me in a very racist and a very public way? What you didn't know," he added, his own voice now a low and a very quiet and a very satisfying whisper, "is that my daughter, my very brilliant and my very tech-savvy daughter, recorded everything and she saved it before you had a chance to delete it." The projection on the wall changed, and the entire, and now completely, and utterly, captivated, warehouse was forced to watch the cruel, and very ugly, and very racist, video of Rebecca, and of Jake, imitating a series of very offensive, and very harmful, racial stereotypes. A series of horrified, and very disgusted, gasps echoed through the warehouse. Some of the company's most important, and most influential, customers, the ones Rebecca had so proudly, and so foolishly, invited to witness her triumph, now began to leave their own faces a mask of a new, and a very real, and a very professional, and a very financial, disgust. And Rebecca, David continued, his own voice now a relentless, and a very methodical, and a very calm, and a very deadly, whisper. Do you remember all of those cruel and very revealing posts in the Miracle Mechanic Updates WhatsApp group? My daughter, she printed out every single one, including your own, and very private, messages, in which you discuss, in great, and very specific, detail, how to keep certain types of people in their place. The projection on the wall exploded into a devastating, and very damning, series of screenshots. There were messages from Rebecca, talking about the importance of cleaning the company of all the undesirable elements, and there were messages in which she discussed, with her small, and very exclusive, and very prejudiced, group of associates, how to use creative, and very effective, methods to eliminate the competition from all the diversity hires. Thomas Crawford, the company's CEO who had arrived, silently, and very unnoticed, at the back of the warehouse, had been watching the entire, and very horrifying, and very public, and very damning, scene unfold, with a look of a growing, and a very profound horror on his own, and very pale, and very angry face. Rebecca, he now roared, his own voice a low, and a very dangerous, and a very final rumble, in my office, now. Wait, David said, his own voice, now a quiet, and a very powerful, and a very authoritative, sound. I'm not finished, yet. He turned to the engine, and with a single, and a very confident, flick of a switch, he started it. The smooth, and a very powerful, and a very perfect, roar of the now perfectly functioning, and now vastly improved, machine filled the, now silent, and now completely, and utterly, and very reverently, captivated, shed. It wasn't just working, it was working better than the original. This engine, David announced, his own voice now a quiet, and a very proud, and a very triumphant, proclamation, hasn't just been repaired, it's been optimized. I have increased its efficiency by over 15% using a series of techniques that anyone with a real, and a very hands-on, and a very practical experience, not just a fancy, and a very expensive, and a very theoretical degree, would know. Rebecca collapsed into a nearby chair, her bright, and very triumphant, red blazer now looking like a sad, and a very pathetic, and a very final, flag of surrender. The tears, which were now streaming down her face, were not tears of a righteous, and a very public, indignation. They were tears of a pure and a very profound, and a very personal, anger, and humiliation. We didn't know, Jake stammered, his own voice now a weak, and a very pathetic, and a very desperate, and a very unconvincing whine. It was just a joke, David said, as he turned to face him, his own eyes, now as cold, and as hard, as steel. You tried to destroy my reputation. You humiliated my daughter at her school, and you actively, and very deliberately, participated in a system that prevents talented, and very hard-working people from growing, and from succeeding, because of the color of their skin. That's not a joke, Jake, it's a crime. Angela Morrison now approached the microphone which the hired cameraman had so conveniently left on the stage. The complete, and a very thorough, documentation of this entire, and very criminal, investigation, she announced, her own voice now a calm, and a very professional, and a very official, and a very final, proclamation, has already been sent to the Department of Justice, to the State Board of Engineers, and to every major, and very interested, news outlet in this entire country. Rebecca Williams, and Jacob Silver, and their small, and very exclusive, and very prejudiced, group of associates, will be facing a series of very serious, and very criminal, charges, of industrial sabotage, and of racial, and of very systemic, discrimination. The silence in the warehouse was now deafening. Rebecca tried to stand up, but her own, and very weak, and very trembling, and very guilty, legs gave way beneath her. By the way, David said calmly, as he turned off the now perfectly functioning, and now vastly improved engine, about That marriage proposal. He looked directly at Rebecca, his own eyes now full of a quiet, and a very profound, and a very final, and a very just pity. Thank you, but I'm going to have to decline. I prefer partners who respect me as a human being. As Rebecca Williams was being escorted out of the warehouse by the company's own, and very grim-faced, security guards, completely, and utterly, and very publicly, broken and humiliated, in front of every single person she had so desperately, and so pathetically, tried to impress, David Jackson stood firm beside the engine he had repaired. The engine he had not only repaired with his own and very brilliant technical skills, but with something much, much more powerful, with his own, and very quiet, and very profound, and very unshakable dignity, with his own, and very brilliant, and very strategic intelligence, and with his own, and very deep, and a very hard-won sense of justice, a sense of justice that no fancy, and very expensive, and very useless diploma could ever hope to buy, because sometimes, when the privileged, and the very powerful people of the world forget that competence, and character, and courage have no color, they discover, in the most brutal, and the most public, and the most satisfying way possible, that underestimating a person can be the most expensive, and the most devastating mistake of their entire lives. A mistake that not only destroys their own, and very corrupt careers, but that rewrites entire, and very ugly, stories, about who really, and truly, deserves to be at the top. 6 months after what the employees of Precision Automotive had come to call the day of the reckoning, the transformation was not just visible, it was profound. David Jackson sat in his new office, a spacious, sunlit corner suite overlooking the revitalized heart of downtown Detroit. The simple brass plaque on the door did not read mechanic, it read, David Jackson, Director of the Division of Technological Innovation and Inclusive Development. Thomas Crawford, the company's CEO, a man who had been shaken to his core by the revelations of that fateful day, had made a series of quick, and very definitive, decisions. Rebecca Williams, stripped of her credentials by the State Board of Engineers, had been fired for cause. She was now facing 3 separate, and very serious, criminal charges: industrial sabotage, racial discrimination, and corporate conspiracy. Jake Silver, her loyal sycophant, had also been fired. He was now working as a used car salesman in a desolate, forgotten corner of the city, trying, and largely failing, to pay off his mounting legal debts. The irony, David thought to himself, as he watched the bustling, and now much more diverse, workforce moving through the courtyard below, is that they were always so afraid that I would take their place. They never imagined that I would create something much, much bigger. The company, under David's new, and very innovative, leadership, had offered him not only a senior executive position, but full, and very generous, funding for his new, and very revolutionary, department. His first project, a mentoring program that connected experienced, hands-on mechanics with newly graduated, and often very theoretical, engineers, was already being implemented, with great success, in 5 different states. Dr. Angela Morrison now worked as a senior and very powerful, specialist consultant for the company, tasked with the difficult, and very necessary, job of investigating, and correcting, decades of an institutionalized, and very insidious, discriminatory practice. Her partnership with David had already resulted in a series of discoveries that had benefited dozens of other talented, and very hard-working, professionals, who had been, for too long, systematically, and very unjustly, disadvantaged. Dad, did you see this? Jasmine, his daughter, now 19, and a brilliant, and very promising, engineering student at the University of Michigan, on a full, and very generous, scholarship, that had been funded by Precision Automotive, entered his office, holding up her tablet. She had, in the last 6 months, become a recognized, and very powerful, digital activist in her own right. Rebecca tried to post something on LinkedIn, about overcoming personal challenges. The comments, well, let's just say that internet has a very, very long memory. David smiled, a soft, and very quiet, and very sad smile. Rebecca had in fact tried several times to rebuild her shattered professional image, but the evidence of her racist, and very cruel, behavior, the videos, the screenshots, the memes, continued to circulate, a permanent, and a very public, stain on her digital, and her personal, reputation. No reputable engineering firm in the entire country wanted to associate its name with hers. Samuel Torres, who was now a senior and very respected consultant in David's new department, walked in carrying a stack of reports. The sales of the new and very optimized engine, he said, his own voice full of a new and a very quiet and a very satisfied pride, have exceeded all of our initial projections. 3 of our main competitors have already made very generous and very lucrative offers to license the new technology. And Jake, David asked, his own voice a low and a very quiet murmur. He tried to sell some of the confidential information from his previous company, from Rebecca's old files, to one of our competitors. Samuel replied, a small and a very wry smile on his face. He was caught in the very same and very pathetic trap that he and his old boss used to set for other people. He is now facing a series of very serious and very federal charges of industrial espionage. That afternoon, David received an unexpected and a very welcome phone call. It was from the host of the local and very popular radio show, the very same show where Rebecca had so arrogantly and so foolishly tried to humiliate him just 6 short months ago. Mr. Jackson, the host had said, his own voice now full of a new and a very genuine and a very profound respect. We would be honored, truly honored, if you would come on our show to talk about your incredible journey and about your new and very revolutionary automotive industry inclusion program. A great many people, Mr. Jackson, a great many people want to hear your story directly from you. David accepted, not out of a desire for revenge, not out of a need for a public and a very personal vindication, but because he knew, with a new and a very quiet and a very profound certainty, that his story could, and very likely would, inspire other people, other quiet and very hardworking and very underestimated people who were facing their own and very similar situations. During the live and very widely listened to interview, the host had asked him, how do you feel about Rebecca Williams now, Mr. Jackson, after everything she did to you? David had paused, and he had thought for a long and a very silent moment. I don't feel anger, he had said finally, his own voice a quiet and a very thoughtful and a very compassionate murmur. I feel sorry for her. She wasted so many years of her life feeding her own and very ugly prejudices, instead of using her very real and very considerable talent to build something meaningful. The real tragedy, in the end, isn't what she did to me. It's what she did to herself. When he got home that night, he had found Jasmine in the kitchen, preparing their dinner. Dad, she had said, her own voice now a quiet and a very thoughtful and a very serious murmur. There's something I've always wanted to ask you. That day, in the warehouse, when everyone was laughing at you, when everyone was so sure you were going to fail, did you really know? Did you know for sure that you were going to prove them all wrong? David had hugged his daughter, his beautiful and very brilliant and very strong daughter. Princess, he had said, his own voice a low and a very gentle and a very loving murmur. Your mother taught me something very important before she died. She said that dignity isn't about never falling down, it's about how you get back up. And sometimes, he had added, a small and a very wise smile touching his lips, letting people underestimate you is the biggest and the most powerful advantage you can have. At that very moment, his cell phone had vibrated with a new notification. It was a link to a new and a very well-written article in Forbes magazine. The headline read, David Jackson, From Neighborhood Mechanic to Automotive Industry Revolutionary, How One Man Turned Prejudice into Progress. 6 months ago, Rebecca Williams had tried to publicly, and very cruelly, humiliate him for her deeply held and very ignorant belief that some people, some very inferior people, need to be taught their place. Today, David Jackson was redefining exactly what that place was for all of the talented and all of the hardworking and all of the underestimated people in his industry, regardless of their color or their background or their education. Rebecca had lost her career, she had lost her reputation, and she had lost her credibility. Jake was now facing a series of very serious and very federal criminal charges. But David had built something that would last for generations. A legacy of fairness, of inclusion, of a true and a very hard-won excellence. A legacy that had proven, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the best and the most profound and the most satisfying revenge isn't in destroying those who have hurt you. It is in building something so extraordinary, so beautiful, so powerful, that it renders all of the smallness, all of the ugliness, that they have tried to impose on you, completely, and utterly, and very beautifully, irrelevant, because sometimes, when the privileged, and the very powerful, people of the world forget that greatness has no color, has no class, has no social standing, they discover that underestimating a person can be the very catalyst that transforms a victim into a leader, a moment of humiliation into a revolution, and a bitter, and a very painful end into an even more powerful, and a much more beautiful, beginning.